You can get rid of stains with it. You can even make your candles dripless with it. It's salt. And we're going to find out all the miracle uses for salt today with the author of Solve It with Salt. Right now, Patty Moosbrugger is with us. She is the author of the book Solve It with Salt. And Patty has come up with hundreds of different uses for salt and lots of fascinating information. Patty, welcome to WHO Radio.
Thanks. Good morning.
Where in the world would you come up with the idea of writing a book about salt?
You know, I was actually at a party with a number of friends. One of them is the editor of the book. And somebody had spilled wine on the carpet, and one of the women at the party knew that you could take the wine out of the wine stain out of the carpet with salt. So literally we just started tossing around different things that you could do with salt, and the editor and I decided to put it in a book.
And did people have a lot of oddball uses for salt?
They really did. There's a surprising amount of things that you can do with salt that you would generally use other chemicals for.
Yeah. Well, you also cover the history of salt. I think what we'll do is talk a little bit about the history of it and then talk about some of the unusual uses. You mentioned in the book that we use 190 million tons of salt a year, but only 5% of it is used as table salt. What are some of the other uses for salt?
Well, I think actually the biggest use for salt is roads in the winter. Actually taking the ice off the roads and keeping it, actually the salt on the road keeps it from cracking. So under really cold temperatures. So in fact, I think they actually use salt in the concrete that they put in the roads.
Mm-hmm. But salt's also in a whole bunch of different products, isn't it?
Sure, bleaching products.
Like paper. It bleaches the paper that we use.
Right. Tans leather. You know, they use it in tanning leather, dyeing. It's a big product in dyes.
Pants. I think you said that pants end up going through some kind of a salt process, right?
Sure, usually to get the color. It's part of the dye to set the color.
Toothbrushes, color TV. I mean, I'm sitting here trying to think, where do they stick salt in? But they must have to add it in as part of the whole process, right?
Sure, and some of the tubes probably use salt in the chemicals. Yeah, it's in almost everything, in fact.
Now, when we talk about salt, we think about table salt, and I have my little canister here of salt that I'm shaking. And when we go to the store, essentially there are three types of salt. There's iodized, sea salt, and kosher salt. Can you tell us the difference between the three?
Yeah, actually there isn't big amounts of difference in the three. They're all pretty much essentially the same thing, but it's actually different. They're put through a different process. Kosher salt is a not so fine grain, and so people use it literally to have a coarser grain of salt. Mm-hmm. It's not kosher as we would think. And iodized salt, what we use on the table, actually the reason they put iodine in it was simply because there was a big problem in the 30s, I think, with goiter. Mm-hmm. And the reason that we get goiter is because lack of iodine. So people weren't getting enough iodine in their salt. So the government actually started a program with a number of scientists where they were trying to decide how they would get iodine to the public, and they worked with the salt companies around the United States actually to add iodine to the salt, and almost immediately goiter and hyperthyroidism disappeared from, the country.
And I think you mentioned that in other countries they add other things, like France and Mexico adds fluoride to their salt.
Right, and another country, I think in Africa, they add iron to the salt.
Yeah. So it can be used for medicinal purposes, so to speak, right?
Exactly. It's a good way to get trace elements or things that people are missing out to the whole public.
Well, then I wonder why they don't do more with salt in America then, since they've already iodized it. Why don't they add fluoride or iron or things that they do in other countries?
Well, actually, here fluoride is added in the water.
Right.
So in a lot of other, and I don't know why they don't do more. I guess they try to get it to us in other ways.
You could almost have the vitamin-type salt where they add. I think I've come up with a new idea. I just need somebody to back me on this with a little bit of money. Probably be a few $1 million to stick it in that salt. Now, what about sea salt?
Sea salt actually is a coarser salt, and it comes from, it's actually just the same salt as almost everything, except they evaporate it from the sea. And people have, in the health food industry, a lot of people sort of think that they'll get the trace elements from the sea if it's not actually refined through the normal refined process. So that's why they use sea salt in order to get those trace elements. But in fact, it's sort of thought that a lot of the sea salt does, in fact, go through the regular process. Otherwise, it would taste very strong of different elements.
Our guest is Patty Moosbrugger. She's the author of Solve It with Salt. It's available in bookstores, and it's published by Three Rivers Press. And, Patty, let's talk about some of those unusual salt uses. In just a moment, we're going to open up the phone lines, and we've got 3 copies of Patty's book to give away to our first 3 callers who have unusual uses for salt. Now, these really have to be unusual. You can't just say, I sprinkle it on my French fries or something like that. Patty, some of the unusual uses that you found, for instance, this summer, some things that could help us. It helps us with our chapped, dry skin, right? If we've got some real dry skin from maybe being out in the sun too much, how can salt help that?
Actually, that sort of is an abrasive, almost sometimes as like a pumice stone for extremely coarse skin, but just to smooth regular dry skin, you can actually add a half a cup of it to your bath, and that will help to open up your pores, I think, and sort of soften the skin, after which point you can lotion up after you get out of the bath, and the salt will actually help your body rehydrate and hold the lotions and the moisture in your skin.
Now, you claim that when we're outside working, that if you sprinkle salt on the grass between the cracks of your bricks or something, that the grass will actually die and go away.
Sure, it will kill the grass if you have like a brick patio.
So salt kills grass.
Right.
So that's cheaper than going to buy that stuff in the store that's supposed to get rid of it, right?
Right.
Also, I tried this yesterday. Ants won't cross a salt line. We were getting ants in the house, so I thought, I'll try what Patty says. So if you put salt, for some reason, ants will not go on the salt. Do you have any idea why?
I'm not sure. It might actually burn them or something. I'm not quite
but
sure.
They totally avoid it.
I have tried that one, and it really works. I had them coming in the same sort of. I could see where they were coming in a crack sort of under the wall, and I put salt, and they just disappeared. They didn't.
But you've got to make absolutely sure, though, that they don't have a way to get around it, because what I did is I sprinkled it near a wall, and then they just started to climb up the wall to avoid the salt. But it does work. Salt does all sorts of things. Patty, I was surprised to see kitchen uses for salt. You said that you can speed up the setting of Jell-O with salt, and some of us, when we're making Jell-O, want to speed it up a little bit. What do you do to speed up Jell-O setting?
Well, you actually simply just place them over. It's also almost the same thing for chilling champagne quickly or something. If you put a bowl of ice and cover the ice with salt and simply put the gelatin on top of that, it'll speed the setting up very quickly. And it's almost the same way to chill a bottle of champagne or wine if you're going to have a party. If you put it in a bucket with a layer of salt and then a layer of ice and then a layer of salt and ice, it'll literally chill in about 10 minutes.
You say it keeps cheese from molding, it keeps pantyhose from running, it helps soften up your jeans in the washer. It's got all sorts of uses. You'll have to get the book Solve It with Salt by Patty Moosbrugger. Let's go to the phone lines. And Tom, you're up first. Tom, what is an unusual use you have for salt?
Well, I make artificial limbs, and I put salt and plaster of Paris to make it set fast so I can work on the mold quicker.
You make artificial limbs and use it to set the plaster.
Yeah, it allows the plaster to set up faster, and I can work on it quicker when I'm doing build-up and such.
That is absolutely fascinating.
That is one that I did not find.
Did you actually go buy the salt like we have, Tom, or do you have to get some special salt?
No, I just use non-iodized salt usually, or iodized, whatever's handy. Sometimes I've had to open the little packets to put it in. When you're in a hurry, you'll do anything.
Well, thanks so much, Tom. If you hold on, we'll get your information and give you a copy of Patty's book, Solve It with Salt. Jeff, you're up next on Winzenburg on the Weekend. Jeff, what's your salt use?
Hi, my use is rather unusual. When we were kids, we used to catch a common housefly, and you may think this is kind of strange, but we used to drown it in a cup of water and then put it on a paper towel and cover it with salt and watch it come back to life.
Oh, gross. What? Where did you come up with that?
I don't know. It's one of those things we used to do when we were kids.
Well, then you didn't really drown it, did you, if it came back to life?
Well, you would think so, but it wasn't moving, and you didn't get any life out of it. And I think the salt just absorbed all the moisture and somehow brought it back.
Gee, Patty, you'll have to add a new chapter in your book on that. Reviving dead houseflies.
Right. Odd and strange uses for salt that we missed.
Yeah. Jeff, thanks so much. You hold on. We'll get your information. And Margaret, we have a copy of the book for you if you have an unusual use for salt. Margaret, what do you say?
I use it if there's rust in clothes. I put it on the rust and then use lemon juice and set it in the sun. And I think that's an old household hint, but it works.
Yeah, Patty, you have a number of uses with, like, clothing, getting stains out, things like that, right?
Right, I had that one, except I suggested using vinegar with the salt, but actually lemon and vinegar work in very much the same way. So that's right. You just rub that paste on the rust stain, and it seems to be the only way to remove it.
Great.
That works good.
Great. Thanks for that tip, Margaret. You hold on. We'll get your information. We've given away now our 3 free copies of Solve It with Salt, but let's get a couple more tips from our listeners. Letty, I believe that you have something you wanted to mention. Letty, what do you use salt for?
I mix up some canning salt in a quart of water with a teaspoon of soda and warm water, and then you put it in a little container and snuff it up your nose, and it opens up your sinuses.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Patty has something like that in the book, don't you, Patty?
Yep, just water, bulb syringe with water and salt solution to actually get rid of, congested nose.
And it kind of cleans out your nostrils, too, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Great.
sure does.
Okay, thanks, Letty. We appreciate you listening to WHO Radio. Patty, salt has kind of a bad reputation in terms of consuming it these days because for health reasons they say you shouldn't have too much, but in your book you say in summertime we need to make sure that we get enough salt, right?
Sure, because, we lose so much salt in our sweat. But I think sometimes the talk about, bad eating habits and salt has to do with probably a lot of the food we consume, too, that's thought of as salty foods, which are fat-heavy as well, like potato chips and French fries. And, I think our salty food intake is over the top with those kind of...
But still in summer, if you're perspiring a lot, you have to make sure that you get that salt in you.
Right.
Let's go to the phone lines. Larry, you have a suggestion on how we can use salt. How do you use it, Larry?
Well, I'm a dentist, and occasionally you have a patient that gags a lot. So I take a little salt in the palm of their hand, have them wet their finger, stick it in the salt, and put it on their tongue. And it's amazing how it helps keep the people from gagging.
I wonder why. Huh.
I had an older dentist teach me that when I got out of dental school about 15 years ago. He didn't have any scientific reasons, but I can tell you it works about 90% of the time.
So next time people come to you, they know that you're not just odd, that you actually have a reason for it, right?
Well, when it works, they don't care if I'm odd or not.
That's right. They just like
think it's great.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great idea, Larry. I hadn't heard
You
of
bet.
that. Thanks so much. And let's see, Royal, you're up next on Winzenburg on the Weekend. Royal, did you have the same idea about a dentist or what?
Yeah. When I was in the service, I had pyrrhea in my teeth, and they were real soft and infected. And the dentist told me to use soda and salt water to get the poison out and to toughen the gums up.
Oh.
And it worked.
Because I know you can gargle with salt water. That usually helps with the sore throat.
Gargle and hold your mouth.
Neat. Well, that's a great idea. Thanks for sharing that. Patty, the book is just filled with lots of great ideas. But one final thing I wanted to ask you about were some of the sayings, because now we have sayings that deal with salt. Like you need to take things with a grain of salt, or like people call farmers the salt of the earth. Mm-hmm. Or I know sometimes they say that soldiers use salty language. Where do those kind of sayings come from?
Well, the salt of the earth obviously is sort of a good term because salt used to be so valuable. So somebody who was the salt of the earth was very important.
Salt was as valuable as gold at one point.
Sure, it was traded in some places in Africa and things. It was traded, piece for piece with gold, literally. And there were some countries that actually made coins out of salt. It was very difficult to come by before they had modern mining techniques.
That's what salt of the earth is. What about taking something with a grain of salt? What does that mean?
That literally just means put it in the proper perspective, and I think that must be a more modern use of it when we, decided that salt was dispensable, actually disposable, because it was so abundant. But in the past it was so valuable. Now we can just get it for nothing. Probably the most interesting one is how when we tell somebody to throw a pinch of salt over their left shoulder for luck.
Right.
That was because actually in the ancient days, people used to literally think that everybody had sort of a good spirit and a bad spirit, sort of like in cartoons you would see them on your right and left shoulder, one of them telling you, oh, do the bad thing, and one the good thing. Well, they really thought that happened, and that on the left side of you was where the bad spirit stood. So if you threw some salt over your left shoulder, it would hit the spirit in the eye and distract him from doing bad deeds.
Well, it must have been interesting to research this book because it's filled with the history of salt, but then also some of the practical uses. You even have recipes and things in there for people to use. The book is called Solve It with Salt by Patty Moosbrugger. Patty, thanks so much for being with us today on News Radio 1040 WHO.